Deutero-Isaiah, chapters 47 and 48. We are the 3rd of August, 2023. Learning objectives for this morning include the following. Well, let's try to outline these chapters, at least for purposes of discussion. Review Judah's apostasy, and then Yahweh's revealed actions, that is, that he was going to take. Try to explain Yahweh's purpose for what he did, and note the dates of Cyrus' conquests, and try to assert Yahweh's sovereignty over nations and history. Try to take a note of the various ways in which Yahweh expresses his sovereignty, his divinity. All right, the structure then of verse 47. In this chapter, Yahweh humiliates Babylon. He eventually does that with every country. How he takes vengeance on her, rebukes her, sentences her, and insults her gods. So we're still dealing in the brief time period leading up to 539, Cyrus' decree, for captive nations to return to their habitations, their homelands. What do you notice about this picture? There's one particular facet of this picture that actually furnishes some insight to the passage. Well, obviously, these are Arab women working primitive grain mill, 1898. Notice the one lady on your left, her leg is sticking out. And when she does that, what happens to the hem of her garment?
It rises
up.
Leg.
Yes. And for ladies working really hard on a hot day out with their grain mills, it would probably rise even higher than what's in the photograph. Yahweh humiliates Babylon.
Come down and sit in the dust, virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, daughter of Chaldea. Take the millstones and grind meal, remove your veil, strip off your robe, uncover your legs, pass through the rivers.
All right. What do you observe?
Come sit in the dust, not on a throne,
Right.
not on a comfortable chair, but down on the ground.
She goes from the position of queen to that of menial slave girl, grinding grain. She was dressed in delicate gowns from head to foot. Now she even has to bare her legs. And whatever passed through the rivers means. Possibly an allusion to the fact that this city, which was built over a river, in fact the river flowed under the walls of the city, those who were escaping from the city would have to wade through the rivers. And what does a lady do when she's wading through a river? Exactly, as modestly as possible. So she is now humiliated. She's no longer the queen of the nations.
Your nakedness shall be uncovered, and your shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will spare no one. Our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, is his name, is the Holy One of Israel.
King James Version is vastly different.
Yes, it is. Read it aloud.
I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man.
Right. I will not meet thee as a man. Notice we have an asterisk beside this phrase, I will spare no one. We're going to talk about that in a moment. All right, that whole chapter is addressed to Babylon. But right in the middle of it, there's this one verse 4, in which somebody says, Our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, is the Holy One of Israel. And it continues on with the statement of vengeance. However, that verse 4 looks very much like a verse in the next chapter. And so some have wondered, somewhere along the way, it looks like a copyist kind of jumped ahead, started writing another verse, and then saw his mistake and went back and continued. So, when the Septuagint translators came to this verse, they said, why is that statement sitting in the middle of this chapter? And so they stuck a verb in there, says our Redeemer. In other words, these are the words of Yahweh that this chapter is quoting. It doesn't have to be a mistake at all. It could be exactly as the Septuagint stated it. The ending word of verse 3 has a letter in common with the second word in verse 4, and a copyist may have skipped over the word says. Does that kind of thing ever happen in ancient Hebrew manuscripts? Apparently, but not as much as in the New Testament. All right, so what's going on here? I will spare no one. Well, trying to figure this out, the verb there, to spare or to meet, is fagat. That is what the little quote sign stands for. Usually means to encounter someone for any purpose at all. Just a meeting, or go and treat someone, or to fall on someone, to whatever it is. That's the verb. The Masoretic text, the traditional Hebrew, makes this out to be a first-person active verb. I will not meet Adam, a human, or a person. So that was the origin of the King James translation. However, in the context, it doesn't make any sense. Talking about vengeance on a nation, then suddenly Yahweh says, I'm not going to meet anybody, and then continues on with his... So the Septuagint version actually translate this, I will not abandon. Some say abandon again, because he did abandon Israel at one point. And then abandon whom? Well, whom's he talking to here? Is he talking to Babylon? I will not abandon at Babylon? Oh, wait a minute. He's humiliating her right now. Then the Latin version of Jerome, he treated this, no one will resist me. Now, we don't normally, as Protestants, talk much, or Orthodox, we don't talk much about Jerome's Latin version of the Bible. But here's the issue. When Jerome translated it, he did it from Hebrew manuscripts that we no longer have, which were at least 500 years older than the oldest copy of the Masoretic Hebrew. And so we're always wondering, what did the Hebrew say that Jerome was translating from? And when he said, where did it come up with, no one will resist me? That kind of makes sense in the context. I'm imposing vengeance, and no one will be able to resist me. However, what would the Hebrew be? Well, then finally, in the middle of the 20th century, as the Dead Sea Scrolls began showing up, at least 3 of the Dead Sea copies of the book of Isaiah provide a slightly different form of the verb, which has a yod stuck in. This could be a first or a third person, but it's a causative form of the verb. I will cause something to happen. And this is where I will not spare or none will resist me. Those 2 translations seem to have come from. Whatever your version says, skip over it until we know more. Yeah.
I was angry with my people. I profaned my heritage. I gave them into your hand. You showed them no mercy. On the age, you made your yoke exceedingly heavy.
So what do you observe?
You're treated like any other conquered nation.
Yes, yeah. So it was Yahweh who gave the Judeans into the hands of the Babylonians. But they were not to mistreat them.
But everybody, through all the centuries and stuff.
Right.
Well, especially since, after Nebuchadnezzar, exceedingly so.
Right.
After Daniel, I think.
Well, you've got the story of Daniel and of Esther. So there were times in which they were mistreated. But this was a captive population. And the Babylonians wanted to keep them profitable. So they were often pressed into maintaining plantations and gardens and water courses and building dikes and so forth. So many were put to work in manual labor. Although those that were competent could be given government jobs, or especially in business matters. They could launch their businesses and pay heavy taxes. In any event, Yahweh felt that the Babylonians took it too far, which you would do if you had power over other populations. Maybe not you, but I would. Here's an interesting thing about the Babylonians. Amongst their clay tablets, they had many kinds of astral observations. So here is a list of stars by name, approximately where they were located in the sky. Now this clay tablet was found at the city of Uruk, which is part of the empire, which sounds like what country today?
Iraq.
Exactly. And so the Iraqis took this old name. Yeah, they were star observers. And so here's what we read in verse 13.
You are wearied with your many consultations. Let those who study the heavens stand up and save you. Those who gaze at the stars and at each new moon predict what shall befall you.
Mm-hmm. What does this sound like to you?
Astrology.
Astrology, okay, yeah. And to predict what will befall you, which you as a young person used to read every day in the local newspaper.
Yeah.
And so the Babylonians, they were great at looking for omens and signs and astral patterns in the sky. They felt that the stars, in many, were likely living beings, some kind of what we might call angels in our common language, which were influencing the events on earth and the outcomes of Babylonia's own. That's what they were doing. It says, you are wearied with your many consultations. It's not getting you anywhere. And here's a drawing made in 1907 from a clay tablet showing the 12 signs of the zodiac. So that horoscope was a Babylonian invention, or at least a development. Whether it was 12, some other zodiacs had 18 points to them, what some called trines.
I think you misspelled the word horoscope up there. You only put one R in it. It should be horoscope, shouldn't it?
Oh. All right, this then brings us to chapter 48. The structure in this chapter, Yahweh now exalts himself. He has put down Babylon and her gods, and now he talks about himself. Scoffers have observed that the God of the Bible is some kind of an egotistical maniac, all the time exalting himself, and therefore he's not nice. And of course, a not nice God should not exist, so he doesn't, or so the logic goes. Anyway, he starts by reproving Israel. He defends his own honor, he exalts his power, and he redeems Israel. You'll notice the inclusio there. The Bible often does this. It will state a theme, break it down into its parts, and then state the theme again. He reproves Israel, but then he redeems Israel. And then there's a closing verse that seems to be out of place.
Hear this, O house of Jacob, who are called by the name of Israel, came forth from the lions of Judah, who swear by the name of the Lord and invoke the God of Israel, but not in truth or right.
In the last chapter, you talked about apostasy. Could you give us a broad definition of apostasy?
The word simply means to stand away. It's when you leave your beliefs, you abandon your faith. So a person who does that, it can be called an apostate. Now, we don't talk much in our circles about apostasy. We just say, he's not walking with the Lord. May actually be quite active with the Lord, but not with us. But someone who says, I don't believe this crap anymore, fairy tales, you say, okay, it's a disbeliever. Believers are those who swear by the name of Yahweh, or otherwise put, they invoke the God of Israel. But what's the problem here? Everyone was going around saying, Yahweh bless thee, because it was a traditional thing to say.
But they weren't practicing that because they were also worshiping idols.
Yes. It says here, they swear by the name of Yahweh, I will pay you next Tuesday. Yahweh is my witness. Come Tuesday, they don't pay, all right? It says, they're talking this way, but not in truth or in righteousness. I've catch myself doing that kind of thing quite a bit. God bless you. I'm not even thinking about God. So there is a textual variant in this verse. This phrase, from the loins of Judah. Do any of your translations say something else?
Yes.
What?
From the wellsprings of Judah.
All right.
From the line of Judah.
From the line of Judah.
Out of the waters of Judah.
The waters of Judah, yeah. Literally, the Masoretic text says, from waters of Judah. So that doesn't make sense. So what was meant by waters?
Family. I got mine says family of Judah.
Okay. Some suggest, well, this might be talking about the Jordan River and the Euphrates. You had to get back to Judea, you had to cross the Euphrates River and the Jordan River, and maybe several in between. And so they'd come through waters to get to Babylon. Others suggest, well, that's just seminal fluid. So what did the Septuagint translate it? Literally, from Judah coming out, or the coming out from Judah. Just from Judah, or those who come from Judah. Which is kind of interesting, because Judah was only one tribe, not 12 tribes. Why would they name just one tribe here, Judah, to talk about Israel?
That was all they were dealing with, wasn't it?
Well, mostly, yeah. See, the 10 tribes of Israel had gone into captivity to Assyria a century earlier. And so it was mainly Judah that was left, although there were stragglers from other tribes as well. Finally, last century, Dead Sea Scrolls show up, and you have a similar situation here where, that word has another letter in it. So instead of mimei, it now becomes mimai, which means from the loins of Judah, or from the lineage of. So a long way around the circle, but you come back to essentially the same thought. That's why the difference of translations. You also have the idea of offspring that pops up in verses 19, and those who like to look at the structure of texts will point out that this forms a kind of paragraph, starting with and ending with mention of the lineage or the origins. All right, let's just be reminded here about the two deportations. The northern Israel tribes that were taken up into Assyria, some up into Carchemish. That's where the battle of Carchemish was centered. And Haran and Nineveh, and eastwards into northern Babylonian territory. All right, when Judah then was deported, they went around the same fertile crescent, as it's called, along the Euphrates River, eventually coming down to Babylon and beyond. So here was Uruk, down here, that we saw a moment ago, and then further down towards Ur and Elam and so forth. So here they are. The Assyrian deportation took place in the 8th century and the Babylonian in the 6th century BCE. Now the Lord begins, as part of his reproof of Israel, he points out a sub-theme of 2nd Isaiah. Verse 3.
Former things I declared long ago, they went out from my mouth, and I made them known. And suddenly I did them, and they came to pass, because I know that you are obstinate.
What's the logic going on here? Right? The former things I declared.
God does what it says he's going to do.
Yeah, he had said earlier, he told them what he was going to do, long term. It just recently added some short-term predictions as well. And then suddenly he did them. Like what? the arrival of Cyrus. But then, because I know that you are obstinate, what's that about? How does verse 4 connect to verse 3?
Well, there's several times in there where God called the people, Israel, stiff-necked, disobedient. So it's all the same thing.
That's right, that's where the obstinate part comes, but how does that relate to the predictions? This requires just some reflection here. There's no necessary answer in the text, except that they are related.
You ain't gonna do what I told you to do.
I told you what the consequences would be, didn't I?
I didn't believe you.
Now do you believe me? So Yahweh, He's so gracious, He actually provided proofs of who He is and why He did what He did. And it was in response to Israel's obstinate disbelief. And came to pass. Here they were, out and deported, and now it's about to be undone. So what were some of the things that Yahweh had foretold through first Isaiah, and now in more detail through second Isaiah? We'll take that as just halves of the book or different collections of Isaianic prophecies. All right, think of some.
Well, he told them they were going to go into exile.
That's one.
For their disbehavior.
Yep.
Years.
So many years.
And then he was going to bring them back.
I will bring them back. Now, while they're sitting over there watching the political situation, Yahweh also had some other things to say about what was going on in the surrounding nations with implications for Babylon. You should be able to think of some of them. We've dealt with them almost in every chapter.
Well, he was going to destroy Babylon.
Yes.
Maybe not the land, but maybe culture.
Exactly. Good observation. All right, that Judea would be invaded by Babylon. Isaiah had warned Hezekiah, a whole generation ahead of time, you should not have shown your wealth to those Babylonian visitors. They're going to go back and tell the king about it, and he's going to think that he would like to have that for his economy. Secondly, Judea would serve Babylon's king for 70 years, which it did. And then the Judeans would be deported to Babylon, or Babylonia, not necessarily all of them in the city. Although in the first deportation, some of the royal family were taken, and the brighter ones were useful for administrative functions within the Babylonian government, including Daniel. There may have been other men who were young men who were equally bright, but they were not well connected. So they were administering water troughs at some plantation. We had the rise of the Medes and the Persians that was about to happen and began to happen. And then that Cyrus would invade Babylon, and we were told from the north and from the east. And exactly, that's what he came from the northeast. Then sixthly, there would be the fall of Babylon and her gods, Bob observed. And we'll just note here then, the return from Babylon to Judea had been foretold. And now it's said, it was foretold 70 years earlier, and now 70 years later. Of course, Isaiah himself was dead by this time. It's going to happen soon. Yahweh defends his honor.
My name's sake, I defer my anger, I restrain it, so that I may not cut you off. My own sake, I do it. Why should my name be profaned?
What's going on here?
God is preserving Judah.
Preserving Judah.
Well, I think, for my name's sake, I defer my anger, so I think mercy.
Yep. If God were instantly vengeful or brought justice immediately after every offense, where would you and I be today?
I wouldn't be alive.
Not in a good place.
There's a principle here. This is an important theological concept. There's another major religion in the world who feels that every believer is obligated, whenever you have an opportunity, to kill God's enemies. Immediate vengeance, whenever you can. But is that God how God really operates?
No.
No. He doesn't have a religion that he has sent into the world to murder infidels. We often wonder, why does God allow the boop-boop party to do so much mischief in our own country? So, what would happen to the name of Yahweh if he brought instant and complete justice upon those who invoke his name but not truthfully?
There'd be no grace.
No grace? But what would happen to him?
He'd run out of people.
Exactly.
He'd have to for a third time.
Yeah. And so this is one of the accusations that is brought against a biblical kind of faith, is that your God doesn't seem to be just. He allows all of this evil in the world. Now there's this movie that's going around, the most popular film in the country right now, talking about an endemic, evil, sinful, wicked practice in our own country. And even though it was produced by those who seem to have some kind of faith in a just God, others look at the film and say, no, your God does not exist. If he did, or if it did, it would not allow this to happen.
But men make it happen, not God.
And that's part of the answer. God didn't do it, but why doesn't he bring instant justice?
He will, but it's in his timing.
Okay. It will be quick, but it's delayed. All right, here's the thing. No matter what Yahweh does, he gets blasphemed for it. But if he had completely destroyed Israel or abandoned that country completely, after making so many promises and so many predictions, we would go back and say, Yahweh said he was going to do all of those things, but instead he just trashed the whole system. He's not trustworthy.
Ooh.
Or obviously doesn't exist. Those must have been false predictions. My glory I will not give to another. There are religions out there who use this verse, and others like it, to disprove Christianity. How can this be? My glory I will not give to another.
Buddhists believe in several gods, and the Muslims believe in a God that they really can't know. The Christians are the only ones that believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit that can be known.
God would not give his glory to anyone else, not even to the Messiah. And so to try to make Messiah out to be some kind of third person of a Trinity, giving the glory of God to Jesus, that would be blasphemy.
Not if the Messiah were God.
Well, so if Messiah were God himself, incarnate in flesh, then he has not given his glory to another. He has simply manifested his glory through a human form. And so remember, as Christians, we're not talking about three gods or three glories. What are we talking about?
We're talking about one and the same God.
That's right.
Who exhibits his glory in a different manner.
I am he, I am the first, and I am the last. My hand laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand spread out the heavens. When I summon them, they stand at attention.
All right, tell me something about Yahweh.
He is, he was, he is, and he always will be.
Yeah, but
He's in charge.
Okay. You guys are quoting somebody else. So Yahweh says, I am the first and the last. Whom were you quoting?
Jesus.
Jesus. So what was Jesus saying? Oh, that he was Yahweh?
He said, I and the Father are one.
All right.
I like verse 13. He's the creator of everything. Just this week, the Europeans revealed they've got this satellite about 1 million miles from Earth. It's going around the Earth, every orbit. But it's seeing stars that are infinitely out there. And just in one little spot, they count thousands of galaxies.
Yeah.
And by multiplying that by the whole sky, that there are a billion galaxies.
Yeah.
And creation is just expanding.
Yeah. So it gets Sagan, who gets on TV and says, You who think that this planet is special, you're just egotistical. This is a tiny, insignificant little planet around a tiny, insignificant little star stuck out in a relatively small galaxy. The whole existence is so great, you guys don't count. So why do you think that there's a creator who would come live on your stinking little planet?
You said so.
Because he chose.
Yeah, he chose to.
He has a plan for us.
It's because he loves
Yeah,
us.
it's not because we were significant, but he created us here. And he had something. Now, big question. Is it possible that Yahweh has created other living, intelligent, sentient beings on other planets, around other stars, in other galaxies? Is that possible?
I would say so.
Well, we don't know. We can't possibly know that.
That's one answer.
The way you put it, yes, it is possible.
Okay. And if it's possible, could he possibly have done so? Or is it conceivable?
Mathematicians have figured out the odds of life existing on Earth at 0. So if it's 0 here, it could be 0 someplace else where
Right.
life exists.
All right, let's suppose for a moment that there are other planets with other sentient beings out there, all of whom were created good, but imperfect, and therefore, if they haven't done it yet, they will sin.
Well, how many times would he kill his son to save them?
How many times would Yahweh incarnate himself in other races on other planets and suffer for their sins and rise as one of them?
Why not?
Well, God can do all things, so we don't know. Our finite minds cannot know the infinite.
But we can ask the questions. Anyway, what's this? When I summon them, they stand at attention. Now, think for a moment. What have we observed before about Middle Eastern ancient opinions of the stars? Remember, they weren't distinguishing stars and planets. They all looked like points of light up in the sky moving around. In fact, in some verses of the Hebrew Bible, stars is a synonym for angels. So those are two classes that are separate in our mind, but which in the Hebrew mind kind of overlapped. When I speak to the creation spread out in the heavens, meaning those points of light, they come to attention. You could actually mean this quite literally. What do we have here? Here's the Persian army marching into Babylon. By the way, how did they get into the city without a battle? The Persian army able to march into the city of Babylon without resistance.
They up the river, and
Through the tunnel.
they came
Waterway.
through the river, and the Babylonians assumed they wouldn't be able to get in through the river. They just had a gate there.
Yeah.
They didn't have any guards. And so they came down the river, took out the gate, they were in the town.
By the way, how effective was the Great Wall of China in stopping the Mongolian hordes?
Not effective.
And one of the problems was there were many gates, and they had guards at the gates. And what do you know about guards at gates?
Bribed.
Or they could just be removed.
Or long gone by the time the... Okay. In any event,
Whom the Lord loves shall perform his purpose against Babylon. Even I, have spoken and called him. I have brought him, and he will prosper in his way. And now the Lord God has sent me and his Spirit.
what is the text talking about?
Jesus and the Holy Spirit.
Verse 6 sounds like it, but verses 14 and 15, it's someone else. First, it concerns Babylon, and it's someone who was coming. And Yahweh says, it is I who brought him,
Cyrus then.
Cyrus the Great. But verse 16 is a bit unexpected. We found some other verses like that in this text. Now Yahweh God, Yahweh Elohim, has sent me and his Spirit. Well, first, syntactically, that's not a very good English sentence. We don't know what "and his spirit" even, how that even connects syntactically.
Well, I would think
It's semantically.
that last one would have two things where, in the Old Testament, where God's prophets talked about Jesus, but people didn't understand that this is who they were talking about.
That's a possibility. It's an approach that Christian preachers have taken down through the centuries. But I like to come back and say, well, wait a minute, this has a context. This was talking about Cyrus. Even if it is applicable to Messiah, who turns out later to be Jesus, what was the application at the time?
Cyrus allowed the deportation to go back to the native land, back to Judah.
There seems to be a quotation, somebody other than Yahweh himself. 14 and 15 is Yahweh speaking. In verse 16, it's somebody else who's speaking about Yahweh.
Sounds like Cyrus, doesn't it?
Sounds like Cyrus. And so at this point, he has sent me and his spirit. Whose spirit?
Yahweh's.
Well, possibly, unless the pronoun me is a mistake.
Oh,
Because in Hebrew, it would be the difference between a yod and a vowel, which look almost identical. The Hebrew could have said, and now Yahweh God has sent him and his spirit. In which case, it could be Cyrus. It could be Cyrus's spirit. In other words, he's a really spirited, intelligent conqueror. Or if it's Yahweh's spirit, Yahweh has sent me and given me his spirit to accomplish this task.
Would that be necessary for Cyrus to carry out what he did? Would he have to have the Lord's Spirit with him?
Oh, you mean Holy Spirit? Okay, now that's a theological concept. Spirit can also mean motivation. It can refer to a mindset. In other words, Yahweh's purposes. But just the structure has sent me. Okay.
He said the same thing about every other people group that was in captivity there as well. And that whatever deity any given group claimed to worship, he would invoke the name of that deity in order to appease that people group.
Okay, so if this is actually Yahweh quoting what Cyrus would soon say, yes, it was your God who sent me. His motivating power is what motivated me, or briefly, his spirit. Well, here's, just by way of review, he had come, Cyrus and his Persian army had, of course, gone northwards to establish his control over the Medes, and then now was coming down into Babylonian territory, came to the city of Opis, then down to Sipar, and eventually marched into Babylon. Yeah.
When they talk about Chaldeans or Chaldea, where is that? Who were
Okay.
they?
All right. Babylonian is not a race or an ethnicity. It's just everybody who lived in the empire, controlled by the city of Babylon, was Babylonian. The major ethnic identity of those who lived in that region were called Chaldean, or together were called Chaldea. Let's come back round to Cyrus's Babylon campaign, 539 BCE. Cyrus had begun with a propaganda campaign against King Nabonidus. So he was going around in other parts of the empire saying, you know, this Nabonidus, he sits up there spending all of your money on his own glory. In fact, when he saw Cyrus coming, where did Nabonidus, where did he go? He did not stay in Babylon. He left town. He got out of Dodge, and he left his profligate son in charge, Belshazzar. Very similar to Daniel's Babylonian name, which was Belshazzar. Maybe just spelled differently in the Hebrew Bible to distinguish the two.
The way I saw it, no T, B-E-L, there was a T for Daniel, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's why somebody say they may have stuck in an extra letter in the Hebrew Bible to distinguish the two. Anyway, he had gotten victory at the city of Opis, which is 50 miles northeast on the Tigris River, and then at Sipar, just 35 miles, and that city fell on the 11th of October, 539. I don't know how they figured these things out. The Persian army then marched peacefully into Babylon on the 13th of October. Now, that would be a long way to go in just one night or one day to get there on the 13th. Think strategically. How could the Persian army get from Opis to Sipar to Babylon in such short order?
River?
By boat on the river? Could be. It'd take a lot of boats.
Okay.
You divide up your army into battalions. You go to Opis, you guys go to Sipar, and the rest of you just march on Babylon. Opis and Sipar can no longer come to the aid of Babylon because we've secured those two parts. When you get down there, you send in the SEAL team, blow up the gates. It all happened, as Yahweh said, rather quickly. So then Cyrus entered the city and was proclaimed liberator on October 30th, 539 BC. It's an interesting thing. When you go conquer a city, they don't call you the conqueror. What do they call you? Or what do you call yourself? The liberator. Exactly.
I'm the Lord your God who teaches you how to succeed. Oh, that you had paid attention to my commandments. Then your prosperity would have been like a river, success like the waves of the sea.
None of this had to happen if you had simply obeyed my commands and exercised justice, mercy, love in your society. So quickly, verse 20.
Go out from Babylon, flee from Chaldea. Declares this with a shout and a joy of proclaiming. Send it forth to the end of the earth, saying, the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob.
Okay. And then the closing verse.
Comfort, oh comfort my people, says your God. She has served her term. Her penalty is paid.
All right, that was chapter 40, verse 1, and now the last verse of chapter 48.
There is no peace, says the Lord, for the wicked.
For the wicked. This seems to close down a section of the second Isaiah, between chapters 40 and 48. No peace for the wicked. Of course, some of you are already thinking, how does the fall of Babylon relate to the book of Revelation, where again you have, Isaiah says, come down and sit in the dust, virgin daughter of Babylon. But then in Revelation says what?
Fallen is Babylon the Great. All the nations have fallen.
And Isaiah had said in verse 48 to the Israelites,
go out from Babylon.
And then in the book of Revelation,
come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins.
So, the question I'll leave you with, who is Babylon today?